I'm Sarah Brooks-Wilson and I get involved in employability issues at the Social Policy Association. I just wanted to steal a couple of minutes to talk about the context of this session and also give you a couple of pieces of information. So, first, just really to say that Lorenzo Antonucci and I, who were both postgrad reps prior to this year, we've both been consulting with postgrads for a while, and employability seems to be a real issue, and publications in particular seem to be an issue. People seem to be concerned with how they can help optimise their opportunities for publications, what their long-term strategies might be in terms of books and journals, how the two interact, what the relationship with the rep is, all sorts of things. So, today's session aims to respond to those particular concerns that have been expressed by postgraduates and those in early career as well. We have people in the executive committee that are actively involved in activities similar to the panel that's taking place today. We have Daniel Edmiston, who's just walked in. Dan, could you make yourself known? Dan's here for the duration of the conference and he's just met with postgraduates. If you didn't get the chance to meet with him and have anything you'd like to discuss to do with postgraduate matters, do grab him. He's here for the duration. We also have Ben Bamberg, who's meeting with those in early career tomorrow, and it's Middleton, Halifax. So it's the room that Dan's just in, which is just across the corridor, and that's at 12:50 tomorrow. And he welcomes postgrads and those in early career. So if you'd like to discuss anything to do with early career, please attend Ben's meeting, and we'd love to hear from you as well. Anything to do with employability, grab me today, because I'm just here for today. And again, we all want to ground our activities in the needs and the issues that postgrads or our respective communities all have. So do let us know. Really, I'm just going to thank the panel, and then I'm going to be quiet and let them get on with all their advice that they'd like to share with you, information. So firstly, I'd like to thank the panel. They're all very busy people, and they all agree without hesitation to take part today. So thank you, all of you. I appreciate your time. Thank you, Nick, for your time in chairing the session today. And also Rogella, who helped organise the session, so I really appreciate your input as well. And the conference organisers for accommodating the session. And finally, just to say that are we filming? We are filming. Yes, we are filming today. The reason for that
I didn't get consent.
Yes, we did. It was an opt-out. So the reason why we're filming is that we want to disseminate today's session beyond the conference. There was a session last year relating to employability. There are results on the SK's website, so please do have a look if you think there might be an interest. We want to put the video from today on the website as well, so if you have friends or colleagues that couldn't make it to the conference and you think they might want information and advice about publications, please do direct them towards the employability page on the SPA's web, and there will be information there at some point in the near future. And thank you for coming along. Like I said before, please participate as much as you can, because our panellists have lots to tell you. Equally, they really want to hear your questions, so please do ask them anything that you want to do with publications, and enjoy the session. Thank you.
Oh, great, okay. Well, once again, thanks very much for coming, and I hope this will be possibly not exciting. You never know, it might be exciting. But whatever else, I think it will be informative. That's the main thing. What I'm going to do is, I'm not going to have a lot to say myself, because I'm not an editor, but I will introduce the panel, and I will explain to them that they have only 8 minutes to talk each, and I will be exceptionally vicious about keeping you to time, because otherwise we run over. The thing we absolutely cannot do is go beyond about 20 to 7, I would say. Otherwise we'll get no supper. Okay? Right, so in no particular order, in a particular order, actually, David Taylor, who's one of the editors of Critical Social Policy, and will be talking in a minute or two about the REM, but not straight away. Kirsten Rummery, who is editor of Policy and Politics, and also did a social policy review sometime. So, Ian Greener, who is social policy and admin for today's purposes, absolutely, and indeed generally, not just today. Hugh Buckle, who is social policy and society, editor thereof. Hartley Dean, who is editor of Journal of Social Policy. outgoing, so as he now keeps after 5 years. Yeah. And Ali Shaw from the Policy Press, who is going to talk about preparing books for publication. So you've got a really, frankly, let's be clear about this, you've got a panel of all the key social policy journals in this country. That's not bad going. And with that, I will shut up. I'm going to pass over to Hugh. Yeah, absolutely, Hugh. Because Hugh, and now you're on my list. You're on my list. And it says, Hugh, the characteristics of a poorer quality submission to a journal.
Yeah, I thought I was fully Hartley.
Actually, it does make more sense to do that. Let's start with Hartley in this case. Tell us the characteristics of a good quality submission, okay? And we'll go with Hartley, and then Hugh, and then we'll go to Ian, Kirsten, Ali, and David. Okay? And 8 minutes.
8 minutes. A good submission.
Yeah, a good submission. The characteristics.
I think perhaps on behalf of all of us, we should actually say that the amount of help as an editor can give can be very limited. One thing that I have discovered in my past is how little control an editor can sometimes have over what goes into the journal. Referees are the important thing, and this is a mysterious and sometimes capricious process, shall we say. So I can certainly give you pointers, advice, but the real world is always messier and chancier, and if nothing else in terms of advice is that if you get an article turned away from a journal like Social Policy, do not feel bad. You are in some exceptional good company, because I have to preserve anonymity. I could tell you some of the people that we've rejected in the last 5 years, and you'd feel Anyway, what makes a good journal article? Now, good means different things for different journals. Know the journal to which you are applying. Research it, look at the kind of material that appears on it. Go on their website and read the notes for contributors. Most important, sometimes it's readership. It's one thing that editors are concerned about, who is our reader. So imagine who the sort of, the readers are going to be when you frame and construct your submission. Now, the essential point, I think, is that an article, particularly in a referee journal, obviously written book publication, what Ali will have to say is something different. If you're talking about a referee journal, it's got to make a contribution to knowledge, yes, or debate. That may sound a pompous way, but it has to be scholarly in that sense. And the point being that it's not just a good essay. I think very often people send us some really nice bits of writing. They're excellent essays. But where's the value added, as it were? Well, how does this contribute to knowledge? Does it draw on original research? Is it contributing to a debate? Is it contributing some fresh insight? These are the critical questions for us. And a good article by those lines is something that is clearly going to speak to our readers with something they haven't heard or seen before. Now, clearly, it's horses for courses. There may be some journals that are widely used by students, and familiarity with the material is rewarding for that, but not for a journal like Journal of Social Policy. This has got to be leading edge, and justifiably leading edge. So if it's just a good review of the literature and the nice rounded arguments, no, send it somewhere else. This is what I mean about getting to know the journal, which is essential. That's the most important point I can make. The rest of it is just, I hate the term common sense. Nonetheless, the point being that it needs to be excessively written. Okay, we're looking for something that is sophisticated in terms of its contribution to knowledge, but remember, if you are writing for an international readership for whom English is not necessarily their first language, if you are talking to people from a range of different disciplines, or whose understanding of social policy is radically different, because the kind of welfare state in which they live, if there is a welfare state where they live, is going to be very different. So it's got to be accessible, it's got to, despite the demand for it being an original contribution to knowledge, the accessibility, and imagine that these are intelligent, highly intelligent readers, but they don't necessarily know the nuts and bolts of the UK social security system. They will be familiar with key literature, so you need to engage with the literature with which they are familiar. But it must actually be accessible, it must be well presented, well structured. And I don't know how I'm doing on my 8 minutes. 1 minute, okay. 2 quick points, one about abstract, one about title. If you're writing an abstract, I'm going to say, tell us not what the structure of the article, tell us what it's got to say, what's the message in the abstract. That's the purpose of an abstract, so that someone can read that and say, oh, I'm interested to read that. Don't outline the stages of the argument, tell us what the argument is. And title. Remember, titles are very important when people are using search engines for finding things that are relevant. Think about not just any keywords, actually we don't use keywords in PHP, but think about the title as something that is searchable, not just something snappy and clever. Sometimes it's very tempting to have a clever title. But a clever title isn't necessarily going to get hits with the search engine. Make sure it's an appropriate title, but once again, rather like the abstract, gives some good clues as to what's in the submission.
Thanks very much. That kicks us off very nicely. I'm just going to carry right on, actually. So he's now going to tell you what not to do.
Just again, I think the really fundamental point is do read the guidelines to contributors. It's amazing how many people, well, they do, they don't read them very well. Sorry about some of the same characteristics, but slightly the opposite. It's got to be often, or sometimes they're not relevant for the journal. Why that? Why that journal? What about it? And also, if they just publish something on the same sort of subject, unless yours is significantly different, why are they going to do another one? So you've got to make a clear argument. I think that's kind of, there are quite a lot of good articles, but sometimes they're not good enough, and sometimes it's not quite clear why they are, what is original about them. And sometimes you have to make that case. Yeah, and you can't make a case for what's original about it, then maybe you need to be working on something different. Does that make sense? So I think it helps that they're often not quite, it's not clear why not. Then there's the awful things like badly written, poor English, poor punctuation, which just makes it look as if you haven't put enough care into it. Not very good impression for either editors or reviewers. Or similarly, formatted for another journal, which is also not very good. Well, kind of following on from that, I think it's stunningly obvious, but it's amazing how much it happens. We all get rejected. Everybody here will have been rejected. But if your article's rejected, the reviewers, I think like Hartley was suggesting, in my opinion, the reviewers are not always right. They quite often are. But if you're rejected, there's probably a pretty decent reason for it. So don't just send exactly the same article off to another journal. Do think about revising it. It does happen. People just send the same thing round and round, and it does get, and actually often goes to the same reviewer. Who will just say, I've rejected this. I had one that I rejected it for one article, and literally 2 weeks later I got for another journal. So, it does happen. So, if it's rejected, revise it, have a think about it, do what's right. And just stunningly obvious things, again, the word limit, I think JSP's word limit is 8,000, SPNS is 5,000. Well, we might stretch that a little bit, but if you send us a 7... for the revised version. But if you send us 7, well, you might not, but we've got 7 more leeways. But if it's 7,000 words, we're not going to take it. Yeah? In fact, we're just going to say, shorten it, and then we'll consider it. So, a lot of what Hartley says, it is just doing the basics, and it does make a difference. You're not always going to get accepted, but you'll get further down. And reviewers can be helpful. Some of my best pieces of work are far better after having been through the mill than they were when I wrote them. I hate to say that. And it's horrible when the reviewer comes back. And we have one that it was the same journal actually, very grateful to the editor, but I think we went through three iterations of it, but actually by the end it was it was substantially different. It was far, far better, I have to say, than it was put in my head. So do take notice of the review. And I think it's maybe just a plea, I don't know about others, but I think, and we kind of ask for it now, but if you do have to revise an article, do a letter that outlines quite clearly how you've responded to the reviewer's comments. And personally, I don't mind if you sometimes say, actually, we've not done what that reviewer said, but tell us why. Yeah? I think that's all helpful. That's me.
Thanks, Hugh. That's both of you. Thank you very much. And I'm going to keep going to Ian, who's got a quite tricky one, I think, of looking at other factors that can improve or impede the securing of a publication.
I'm not even sure I know what that means. I'll have a go. I'm going to kind of build on some of the things that Harvey said and think about them necessarily through the lens of social policy and admin. Is your article, as Harvey said, an essay, or is it argument-driven? And I think this is a really interesting distinction that gets made. If you look at the article, some American literature around this about what's published in one doesn't, particularly by an American academic in Belgium. And the argument-driven thing is the number one factor, if you like. What do we mean by that? Well, does your article have something you can either agree or disagree with? Or is it just a collection of observations about the literature? Does it actually come to a point somewhere which makes a point which people can agree or disagree with based upon the case that you've made in relation to it? And if it is an argument-driven, then again, you're asking people to sort of go through your literature, go through all of this thing you produced without a necessary gain at any point. So the argument-driven thing, I think, is a really important starting point. And where are you going to put that? You're going to put it up front. You're going to tell us in the first few pages what that is. Your paper is not a detective story of the old kind whereby on the last page I'm finally going to tell you what this is about. Now, we all feel a bit like that from time to time because we're going to show these reviews exactly how clever we are, and we're going to take them down twists and turns, and when we get to the conclusion, ha-ha! You weren't expecting that, were you? No. Tell us up front, then make your case. Let's work our way through and let the reviewers see exactly what it is you're trying to achieve. Something you see a great deal of is people over-presenting data in variables. So you've gone out and collected either qualitative data you've done quants, and you're going to give me every single quantitative table that you ran, every test, doesn't matter if it's significant or not. So I'll give you another one that will show you exactly how authoritative I've been in my data analysis. In my qualitative data, I'm going to have 500 words at the top, 500 words at the bottom, and because I care so much about my respondents, it's all going to be data in the middle. Now, come on. Again, think about this in terms of the contribution task. You want to be faithful to the respondents that you work through. But at the same time, if your paper is entirely made up of that data, and unless you've got a very, very, very good reason for doing it that way, then don't go down that road. Be clear about contribution as Harvey's going to say. Here's one. Say why people outside of your area should care about your paper. Something we all get so enmeshed in the particular area we're interested in. We get focused down on it. We know the nuances. We know all the acronyms. We know the ins and outs of that particular system of social benefit or social policy, and we want to tell everything we know about it. Then we get to the end of the paper having articulated all of this and completely forgotten like anybody else. Outside of that fairly narrow sphere should care about it. One thing that's distinctive about all of the journals is that they're general social policy journals. And that what we need to do is make sure that people read the pieces we publish in them. So it might well be that you have the definitive study of the benefit system in Italy in 1926. That's fantastic. But it's always going to struggle to get into one of these journals because we have to then justify to our editorial boards why we published this very, very narrow piece. And it's unlikely to be cited or picked up by very many people at all outside of that media. Think who's going to be reviewing this piece when we put it in. And it's usually quite easy to tell because it's people who've written for that journal before. I have a database which I open when I get a new submission, and I type in keywords, and they come up with titles that have been published before, and I go to those authors, and I look to see whether they've reviewed recently for the journal, and if they haven't, then I send it to them. Now this isn't particularly sophisticated, but what it means is you've got to not only research the aims and the objectives and the specifications for what we're expecting from the articles from you, you've also then got to have a look to see what the journal has published before in that area. It's likely those people are going to be your reviewers. So it might be nice to cite them, or at least engage with them in some kind of way. say to them, I know you published in this field, you know it. It sounds like unnecessary deference in some respects, but as a journal editor, my concern is making sure things I publish in my journals get cited and get picked up. And if I just published a fairly obvious piece a year ago, which is part of the debate which you're contributing to, and yet you haven't bothered to look it up, that again indicates a fairly obvious weakness. Don't run out of words in your conclusion. Something else that happens a great deal is you've written the first 2/3 of the paper really well, but then you've discovered there's this 8,000 word limit, and you're running up against all of these problems which we experience all the time about trying to make sure that you've got an authoritative review which actually covers everything that you need to, then you've got your data in, you've got your discussion in, and you finally got to the point of answering the question and you do it in one paragraph. And the obvious thing the reviewer is going to come back to you is say to you, you need to give us more on this. This was the whole point of your paper. And at the other end of this, the other thing we see a great deal of is the authoritative literature review. So, my stock example is Citizenship. If you're writing on citizenship, yes, it's really nice if you go right back to TFP, go back to Marshall. But at the same time, Marshall isn't actually contributing anything toward your paper. And why are you citing him? Because that's not only technical citation, it's technical bibliography. You're working me through everybody who's written on citizenship since that point, which make clear that you're authoritative. Then you're going to end up with a stonking bibliography which is taking up thousands of words which could actually be in your paper instead. Think carefully about why you're citing and make sure you present enough to show your authority, and also that you show you're up to date, but at the same time you don't need to cite absolutely everything you found in your literature research using whatever bibliographic database it was. Last point, get a critical friend. Get somebody who you can show stuff to, and they will give you not an opinion which makes you feel great about the world. Hey, you've written another fantastic piece. Aren't you marvellous? Isn't it strange that nobody publishes anything you ever write, even though they're all brilliantly fantastic? There's somebody who you can not only show your papers to, but show the responses you get back from journals as well. Nobody likes it when you get a response from a journal. Even if they've said, we accept it, chances are there's a few critical comments buried away and stuff like that. The key thing is to give yourself some distance. Lock it in a drawer for a week, bring it out again, and it won't feel as bad the second time you read it as it does the first time. If you can show it to somebody else, that's even better. Because then they can, quite often somebody else's interpretation of what journalism is completely different to your own. So I've got people who've got acceptances with minor changes, and they've been in tears in my office. They say, oh God, they said it was fantastic, apart from that paragraph at the end when you didn't like the way I phrased something. And that's the end of my universe. And they've completely forgotten that this has been accepted. And they've just got to make minor changes. It's very easy to get a great deal of emotion staked upon what it is you've written. And so my last point is to try and separate that out. You are not the paper that you've written. That is something you wrote by the time we reviewed it 4 or 5 months ago, got the comments back to you. Please achieve some degree of emotional separation, or this is going to be an incredibly bruising journey. Getting some sort of thick skin and getting a critical friend is the way.
Thanks, Ian. That's some great stuff there. I particularly take your point about letting someone go cold for a bit. If you can, you've got a space for a week or two. Critical friends are fantastic, and if your friend is, and some of us are. The idea of picking the drawer and picking it up again in a week or two, I think that's a very, very good point. Let's carry on. Kirsten is going to talk to us about choice. Do you publish a journal article? Is it a book chapter? Or are you going for the full Monty and publishing a book?
Right, I'm going to talk a little bit about choice and having a strategy. This is about a publication strategy for your own particular project, but also a publication strategy over your entire career. Because we're in this for the long term. We're not just in this develop our things for September 2014 cut-off, God knows what. I think taking on board some of the things that we've been saying before, as a reviewer of lots of different kinds of things like textbooks and policy papers and things for funders as well as for journals, the one thing I do write an awful lot that gets things rejected is this isn't placed within the context of the field. It's particularly not placed within the context of theoretical contributions. So if we take, Nick's example of Italian things in 1926, that might be really, really interesting, but you can put it in a theoretical framework that makes sense, that pushes forward values and discipline. So you have to think really, really carefully with each piece of kind of complication, what is it you're trying to achieve? Who are you talking to with this complication? Now sometimes you want to talk to your peers, which is why you try and publish in peer-reviewed journals. But sometimes you're trying to make what might be called impact in the wider community, particularly in our discipline. You might want to be addressing policymakers or practitioners or other kinds of audiences. You might want to be addressing students through means of textbooks and things. I know Alice will talk about different kinds of books. You might want to be giving them the definitive results of your research in terms of a really weighty monograph, or you might want to be making an argument that pushes forward an area. In all of those things, you need a slightly different kind of strategy and slightly different approach. Now, we get driven very, very much by REM, and everything's got to be peer-reviewed journals and 4-star, 3-star publications, because that's all what counts. Sometimes it's a useful thing, and without salami slicing, which is the same thing as to test out different kinds of publications and different kinds of things. It can be a really good idea to write the definitive book chapter, even though I know they're not sometimes right. They are sometimes good. And it depends what kind of book. A good book chapter in a good edited volume is far better than a really bad journal. Think about not just writing on your own, but writing with other people. Sometimes people might not agree with your point of view. Sometimes people will challenge you. Sometimes people from slightly different disciplines. Sometimes people will bring in different empirical data or a different theoretical perspective on what you're doing. Because again, that will challenge you to try and present your data in different points of view. Think about not just publishing in social policy journals, lovely as they are, obviously we want you publishing in social policy journals. But sometimes, you've got social policy is quite a porous discipline. You actually be talking to the political scientists or the economists, they actually have more interest in what you say. And actually, I do wave the flag there for trying to take social policy out and get other disciplines to actually listen to what social policy have to say. So don't just send it to us, even though of course you want to. Send it to some journals that are kind of sociology might. That's really what your strength is. Over the course of your career, you might end up being a researcher in sociology or political science or health services researcher. And much as we hate that as a social policy association, we'd much rather have you all within our own castle and enclave of social policy. You have to be a bit careful. It's better to have kind of varied communication strategy and not have published just in the same 3 journals. Finally, think about different kinds of things. Sometimes you're publishing for funders, so you're writing a project report. You can't usually just take that project report and then send a distilled version of it to the journal, although I'm sure we've all seen versions of that. Similarly, you can't just take a chapter from your PhD thesis and just send it to a journal. You have to really, really think through what are the key things. And if you're not going to salami slice over your career, there are lots of people who have made an absolute stunning career over a very small empirical basis of their work, but they've actually looked at it over the course of their career from lots of different perspectives, from lots of different theoretical perspectives. Sometimes they end up disagreeing with those and not arguing against what they originally argued in their early 20s and the late 40s and 50s, etc. It's interesting to see what happens again. But don't be afraid to do that. Don't hold on to, this is my contribution to our values and your argument saying it. Look at what your data says. Because your data says well moved on. Read other people. Do not keep citing yourself and reading yourself, although that would push up the citation. But as Ian said, there's a lot of work going on in your field. There's probably more work going on in your field when you finish the project than when you started. Like when you do your PhD, you have to go back to the literature reviews, exactly the same as preparing a journal article. The day before you hand it in, make sure it really is contemporary and up to date and you consider all the outcomes of the stuff that's going on there. And the other thing is, I will close on this, resilience. So keep coming back to it. Learn from your failures and your rejections. It's very, very tempting when you get rejected. Oh, what the hell do they want? and go away. And it's the same, you know, with the people who do PhD, argue with the examiner, but how do they know why they possibly have that? You can learn a hell of a lot from people who have disabilities, difficulty. It's exactly the same with research applications, anything else. You know, people who are applying for funding have a 1 in 5 chance. That doesn't mean before that they did were really crap. Like they learned each time before that they were preparing, and then they got the fifth. Exactly the same with publications. Sometimes you get rejected, sometimes you have written for the wrong audience, you haven't quite got the international flavour, you haven't quite got the theoretical flavour. Learn each time and get better.
Thanks very much indeed. Moving on to Ali. Talk about a book. Yeah, sorry, slightly else thing. Sorry, there you go.
That's fine. Hi. Right. Actually, I have to say that a lot of what's been said, I totally agree with. Be it, I mean, there is actually quite a lot of overlap between things that make a good journal article and make a good book. And I agree a lot with Preston about having a publication strategy. I'll talk quite practically about a publication proposal and the process because people might not know that. But afterwards, do come and talk to me if you want to have any more detail. Okay, so just quickly back to what do you want to achieve? You know, if it's your first book, it's likely to be a research monograph. It's likely to be coming out. A publisher will normally publish it in hardback, and everybody will go, I don't want my book published in hardback. The reason for it is it will come out in hardback and it will come out in a digital form that's basically for libraries. Your work is scholarly. At that point, it's likely to be going to research libraries rather than individual publishers. So if you approach a publisher and they say, my book is going to be in hardback, don't let your heart sink too much. It is pretty much a standard format for a PhD conversion. Now what I'm going to talk about is you thinking about publications beyond that. There may be a first book, but then there will be subsequent books after that, hopefully. So in the long term. So what do you want to achieve? Who do you want to reach? Audience is absolutely crucial. So when you're writing your PhD, if I go back to that, you're talking to your examiners, you're writing for a specific purpose. When it comes to book publication, you actually want to reach different people. It may be that your work is incredibly scholarly and it is just other academics you want to talk to. Or in social policy, it may be something that's quite practical or policy orientated. You might want to speak to policy makers and practitioners. Have a think about, A, is a book the best way to do that? B, if a book is, are there other things you might want to do too? Do you want to do the equivalent of, short summaries and findings that you can reach policy level with? Don't think just, it's only about a book. There are obviously, you may want to write textbooks, you may want to, write some of the more ideas books at a later stage, but, just think all the time about your audience, that's the key thing. So, choosing a publisher, there are lots of us out there all scrubbing around trying to publish the very best work. I guess the key thing is, do they publish in your subject area? Sounds daft, but even, some publishers will only have published a couple of books in your area. Make sure that there's a body of work that you can sit alongside. Are the people you admire publishing with them? It kind of helps. In terms of the fact that, your work will sit alongside theirs and the catalogue will be promoted together, it's really helpful. Are they aiming at the right audience? Actually, if you want to do a really practical focus book, you may not want to go to a publisher that predominantly publishes the research monographs. It sounds obvious, but actually there are quite clear distinctions between those things. Do they have a good reputation? The best thing you can do is speak to your colleagues. Are they supportive? Are they helpful? Do they just, churn it through and, and have nothing to do with you? Or actually are they able to support you and help you? Really important when you're doing early career work. There will be, just like the journals, there'll be some proposal guidelines on the publisher website when you found publishers you'd like to work with. Download them, follow them. They may be, like ours, you look at them and they're 4 pages and they look a bit overwhelming, but when you look at the detail, actually it'll say, if you're looking for a textbook, do this, and if you're trying to do a monograph, do this. It'll guide you through it, so don't be overwhelmed by an awful lot of words initially. The key things are, just in fact, as we said earlier, really, really good synopsis. think about, you know, the message that you want to get across, the story you want to get across. If you can do it in one sentence, that's incredibly helpful. Publishers have to go and sell your books to things like librarians or online, and they can use one sentence sometimes. So distilling it down, what's unique about what you're trying to say. The proposal guidelines will take you through it, but there'll be a synopsis, there'll be chapter outlines. Again, think about the arc of your book, obviously introduction, conclusion, how you want to take. I do think of it as a story, regardless of what kind of book you're writing, you want to take the story through and come to a conclusion at the end. Personally, other than maybe textbooks, I quite like there to be references embedded in it and being really clear about your theoretical, your conceptual underpinning. Because when that goes out for peer review, which is really helpful, is the peer reviewer will know exactly what we're talking about and where your book's situated. So the proposal guidelines will ask you for content synopsis, so a paragraph, 1 or 2 paragraphs on each chapter, and then it will ask you, who's your market? Please don't say everybody, or everybody in social sciences, or really, really think about who. Publishers think about it in 2 ways. They think about core readership and secondary readership. So they think about who will actually purchase the book and who will want to read it. And those 2 things are not, well, hopefully they overlap, but there is a bigger readership to purchases. So, obviously with monographs, key things are academics and high-level students, but they'll be mainly purchased through libraries. Think about your disciplines or subject areas that will, that you want to talk to, but also if you are trying to aim at something in policy and practice, be quite specific about where exactly you want us to go. Please don't just do blanket. Okay. Audience CV. Why should you write that book? What is most important? Why are you the expert? Really brief, but just focus on that, and then it'll ask you about practical details, how I'm doing that kind of stuff. The key things are initially approach an editor. Just a quick, are you interested in this? And then you'll work with editors to shape your proposal. It's a really good idea to do that. Tips for a successful proposal, have I got? Clearly written, well structured. Just as we were saying, no lazy cut and paste, no spelling errors, because what we're judging is what you're going to be writing for us. And so if you don't do it very well in the proposal form, we have no confidence you'll do it better later on. Be realistic about your audience, be really clear about why your book is significant. Don't just assert your views, back them up. Think about your competition. If you're doing scholarly work, generally, of course it's unique. Your book is, your research is unique, it's something that you've done, but it fits within a body of work. List that, so a publisher knows. And back to, I would totally agree, get feedback and advice from colleagues. Critical friend is absolutely spot on. And just talk to publishers, they are quite human, honestly.
That's great. Okay. Rep. I was put dreaded in front of the rep.
I'm going to be slightly deviant because I am going to talk about the rep, but I do want to say something about critical social policy as well as the journal, just very, very briefly, because whilst I endorse all the things that everyone else has said about scholarship, about rigour, about focus, critical social policy as a journal is slightly different, and it is about knowing your journal and knowing your audience. And there's Nick rightly introduced me as a representative of the editorial collective. We don't have an editor, I'm not the editor. I think along with Feminist Review, we're the only journal left that's run by an editorial collective. And that's important because critical social policy was established in 1980 as a political project. It's very clear. It used to say it was a journal of socialist theory and practice on the masthead. It doesn't say that anymore. Because of the complexity of politics over the intervening period. But there's no doubt that critical social policy remains a politically committed journal. And so what we're looking for is articles which are value-based, and it's very important to read the guidance to authors again in critical social policy because it's different. It talks about reflecting on differences in political and economic and social and cultural power about different ways of securing rights and needs and challenging inequalities and injustices. So it's a journal which is still on the left in politics, and unashamedly so, is trying to introduce critical perspectives into the study and the practice of social policy. So I do want to just say that actually it's important to understand that it is in many ways similar, but in some quite significantly different. And sometimes we get articles which really aren't appropriate for critical social policy because they haven't grasped that political nature of the journal itself. Having said that, I'll just say one other thing, again, which I don't think others have mentioned. CSP, like many of the other journals, not only publishes individual articles, but we also occasionally publish themed issues. And so if you're working in a symposium or you've got a conference going on or something where you're trying to get a collection of articles together, that's something you can pitch to us. It's still within the same value frame, of course, as the journal. Okay, but in relation to the REF, well, it's quite difficult, really. You can come at this from a number of angles. From the perspective of the journal, I'll start with. I think someone suggested that the REF has quite a distinct impact on submissions to journals. Intuitively, in our collective, we felt it did, but we looked at some figures recently, and actually, the rate of submission to the journal is not that affected by the cycle of the research assessment exercises. It does go up slightly at the last minute towards when you can get into publication, but not significantly. What interestingly happens is the level of rejections goes up significantly, because what we find is people panicking at the last minute, salami slicing, as others have said, shoving in anything to get their third or the fourth piece for the REF. And so I would say I would echo about having a research strategy which means you're not left at the last minute if you're involved in a research assessment exercise having to get things in right at the end, because invariably the quality suffers and we find we reject a lot more. Now, obviously publication deadlines are crucial for counting in various research assessment exercises. In the UK, REF has a cut-off application date for the material. But we, like many of the other journals now, we publish online first, so that articles, when they're accepted, get put up on the publisher's website before they appear in hard copy in the journal. And once they've got the DOI, Digital Object Indicator, which is just a number that says you're in the public domain, published online, that counts, for example, for the REF. So the fact that you may not have come out in a hard copy of the journal, if you've got a DOI and you're in the public domain by the cut-off period, your article can count towards a research assessment exercise. Most people working in the UK or certainly in England will be submitting, most likely, any work they submit to Unit C22 in the REF coming up, which is social policy and social work. Of course, some of you might be submitting to sociology, some of you might be submitting to the politics one, but predominantly into that unit. And the units are aggregated by generic disciplines. So in the social science panel, none of the panels are using citation data. So the fact that the citation rate of your article is not something which is going to be considered by the panel. They are not using journal impact factors. Again, these things are quite contentious, and I'm sure you've been aware of lots of debates about whether they should or shouldn't. Some other science-based panels are using them as secondary information, but no panel in the REF is using citation or impact factors as a primary determinant of quality. So if the panel is to be believed, our panel is going to read everything, and they are going to rank it according to its quality as defined within the criteria that are published in the panel, not according to the citation rate or the impact factor. However, people are human. In the back of their minds, they may well have their own internal hierarchy of publications, so that's something that you perhaps need to bear in mind. I think the other thing that impacts on publications is the attitude of funders and journals to open access publishing at the moment. You may well be aware that the Higher Education Funding Council for England have started through them, the Research Councils UK have started a debate about whether or not the next REF, 2020, which if you've got a research plan, as we were talking about, you should be thinking towards, will be based on open access publication, and all the signs are. So you need to be sure that the journals that you're publishing in do meet the open access criteria that the panels will use. I mean, it's not set in stone because it could change by 2020. Each time it changes, but at the moment we were talking about 2020 REF using open access as a criteria. Now, open access at the moment means unrestricted public access to the results of publicly funded research. Now, interestingly, in the social sciences and the humanities, we're published by SAGE. SAGE calculate that no more than 10 to 15% of the articles that appear in their social science and humanities journals are publicly funded. However, journals are being dragged along this route, rightly or wrongly, and everybody has range of positions on this. For example, SAGE, the publishers of critical social policy, conform to the green open access route, which is publicly available without a subscription or after 12 months, is the green access route. The gold access route is immediately published publicly available by payment of an article processing charge. So those are things you have to bear in mind. I think I'll stop up now. I think really that those are things that are more important in the long term, because as I say, at the moment the REF is not using any of these. At the moment, the REF is not using open access, it is not using citation indices, it is not using journal impact factors, but it's moving towards that. However, most journals here, all journals here, are international. And not only do they publish international articles, many people publishing in our journals may be from other countries and other assessment exercises where they may well decide to use citation indices and impact factors. I'm not quite sure the final decision on the Australian REF, but they were considering it at one point. I think they decided not to. But that's something you have to bear in mind if you're located or possibly submitting your work to an assessment exercise elsewhere.
Thank you very much. Well, actually, we didn't do too badly there on time. Pretty much covered on time. We've got about 35 minutes if we try and get out of here at 20 to 7. So I think the next thing is really just to ask you to ask them any questions, any issues you want to raise. What I don't think we've got time for is for every single person to answer every single of your questions. So I think what I'll do is if you just stick your hand up, if you want to ask something, maybe you could address it to one of the people here straight away and do it like that. Yeah. So questions, please. Yes, hello.
What do you think are the main differences between the style of writing of someone just finishing a PhD and someone well established in their career? What are the main differences? It's hard to see from our end, I think, sometimes.
Would you like to take that one?
I think there's something interesting here about voice. And I think after a few years of writing, something you see with somebody who has published a few pieces, they begin to establish a voice which is quite distinctive in relation to the way they express themselves. And that's partly confidence. So I'm very aware that a lot of new authors who have just finished their PhD, they are writing in a very vanilla, very plain style, because that's almost the least contentious way of getting your thesis through in many respects. I think what people develop after a while is a kind of confidence about expressing themselves and about beginning to develop arguments, about the way that they go about asserting the chain of links in that argument. It becomes so distinctive at times that it becomes almost impossible to peer review something. It lands on your desk and you go, well, even if it's self-citing one, you can pick up some people. It's so immediately obvious. I'm not suggesting that people get there quickly or some of us never get there, but I think that there's something about that confidence and expression which people begin to acquire after a while. The realization you don't have to write in a very, very generic, vanilla style. It is possible to write good work in a way which carries your voice through. And I think that's the thing which I would encourage you to begin to develop.
Okay. Hartley wants to add something to this.
Yes, I think in addition to that confidence is something to do with simplicity. And the confidence thing begins to matter because when you've done a sort of PhD, whatever stage in your career, I did a PhD very late, so I was used to writing a lot for a very different sort of audience. You had the desire that in your PhD thesis you wanted to say everything you conceivably had to say about the world. Then, of course, once you get out of there and you're doing object research, bits of sort of communicating bits of insight here or there, you realise that each little piece of work is part of a wider corpus. It does not have to contain everything that you've got to say. And once you've shed that burden, then there is the chance to actually be much more incisive and simple in the way that you write. So shut my mouth to
Briefly, yes.
Which is about, as people acquire a greater breadth of things to write about, they actually become more focused and more incisive. And I would encourage you to present your work to different kinds of audiences. To be able to present them, if you work in health services research, it's very different if you're talking to GPs or nurses or practitioners than if you're talking to researchers and social science researchers or to other, more quantitative statisticians, etc. That helps you acquire a kind of much broader breadth of things, but also helps you acquire the ability to be able to communicate very clearly and concisely. Simplicity can be very deceptive. There's an awful lot hiding behind that simplicity. But all writing is about communication with the audience. And the more you do it, the better you get at it. But you should try and communicate in different fields. So, present your work at different kinds of conferences. Do 4 different conference papers before you write the journal article, because that will get you a much better, more confident journal article than if you just presented it as part of your PhD.
More questions? Hello.
Yeah. I want to ask Ali. You said publishers might be unsupportive. What kind of support can we expect from publishers?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. I think that what you should expect is an editor who is engaged with what you're writing, so that when you first speak to them, when you first go to them, give them an idea that they obviously they respond to you, and they respond to you in a reasonably timely manner, and that they help you in terms of actually formulating your proposal. But you get some backwards and forwards support at that stage. So you'll get your from Policy Press. We'd send it out for peer review, we'd gather the comments in, and we'd send them all to you and ask for you to feed back to us. I mean, it's a bit like a journal article, but feed back to us, what you take on board, what you don't, as I said earlier, you can argue against it, and that your editor is working with you in order to help and support you. They should be on your side, because what's going to happen is that proposal and the comments and the business case is going to go to what will be some form of acquisitions committee. And your editor is your voice piece at that committee. They're the person that's selling you and your product to the rest of the committee. So I think that in those early stages that support is really helpful. I would also say that once, editors can also help seeing draft material. That's not always necessary, but they can. But then once in production, that you have essentially you are given a very clear timetable about what the production schedule is, and negotiated actually, not just told, so that you actually, and that you do get a chance to respond effectively to copy editing and proofreading queries, and that you end up with a product that you're actually happy with as well as the publisher. It's not just, you put it in, somebody proofs it, and then it goes out. It doesn't happen. I mean, most publishers are not like that, but I think you should expect, particularly for early career, you get some hand-holding through the process. They may all say we don't do that, but that's what should happen.
Well, I know that there's no global answer to this question, but when can I hand in a paper? So what should I have done before I send in a paper for So the question is, should I have gone, as you said, to 4 different conferences and presented it, or?
I think I'd say bang off as many people as you can, either conferences or colleagues or friends, because it's horrible. I hate sharing things with my colleagues because they're mean about it. But, no, but it's better for them to be horrible than for the reviewers to be horrible. So it is about developing it. So I think it's sharing it as much as you reasonably can. And if you're starting to, if people start to say, actually that looks pretty good, then it's probably good enough to have a go. Yeah. But going to conferences is really helpful, useful. But if you're going to have to wait 4 years.
There are other conferences.
Yeah, there are. But with other people that you know, that can be just as useful. But again, if they say that bit doesn't make sense, then it probably doesn't make sense. So you have to listen.
But the answer to all global questions, of course, is 42. And I mean, it's not as if there is a precise answer, and it much does depend on the stage of career, the work that it is, and particularly if it's tedious. If there is a case for quick publication, you may want to accelerate that process. And sometimes you feel good about this. I'd really like to test this with the referees, you know. So, I mean, all of that is fundamentally sound and nice, but don't regard it as a straight answer. I mean, no.
The tiny nature, particularly in art, is actually quite key. Sometimes something makes an awful lot of sense now, and it won't make any sense at all. I'm doing work at the moment for the Scottish Independent Federation. In a year's time, they will give I would say, because it was gone. So sometimes you have to seize the moment, but you have to have sufficient body behind you to still be making a significant contribution to your discipline. So quick is fine as long as you've actually got something to say, but I think we're always, for the right opinion pieces, right from right, so publish it.
I wanted to ask about how important the currency of your data is. So if you have material in your PhD that's still unpublished from a few years ago, but the actual principles behind it are very relevant in the current policy environment, even though the policies themselves have moved on. I mean, I know that you need to update the literature, but do you need to update the empirical work, or is that still something that...
If it's going to be, it goes back to does it make a significant contribution to the discipline, no matter what? And it should. Most of the research you're doing should, if it's worth doing, it shouldn't be quick and dirty, policy analysis for somebody in 5 minutes and I'll just toss it in. It should be more substantial than that. I wrote my PhD on things and then went back and reanalyzed the data and wrote a book on it that was in the end 3 or 4 years beyond the process. And actually the book was much better because I had good time to think about that and make much more significant contribution than the PhD did. So if you've got something to say, I've got colleagues who are still reanalyzing interviews that were 20 odd years ago. There's still new things to say about that. But sometimes you do have to think very carefully about putting it within a theoretical framework that makes sense beyond the here and now and the policy context. Always be aware, I always say this, you're talking to an international audience. Social policy is not any longer a UK-based issue, and it's no longer just a reaction to whatever the current policy framework is. You should be talking to people outside the UK, and if you've got good data and a good body of theory backing up, then they'll be interested in what you've got to say. They might not even know that the policy's moved on, perfectly honest. We all think, we all live very specifically in our policy worlds and think that everybody must know the latest, white paper that's come out that's moved the field on. People outside your specific narrow field won't actually know that or particularly care about it.
Can I add, there's a kind of rider, I guess, to that in a way, because I was going to say there's the issue of how contemporary is your data. There's also the issue of how contemporary are the debates and the policy conjuncture that you're writing about. We've had a number of articles recently, some of which we've accepted and some of which we've rejected, around policy themes and political debates which kind of really have moved on. For example, we still get people writing about, the idea of the big society as though it's just been heard of. And you think, well, actually, things have moved on. We've also had other articles recently which write about, kind of recent developments in relation to the way big society thinking is moving. So what I'm saying is don't get locked into a kind of a debate which is past in a way. And I'm not saying it's all past in this society, but I mean, but the early explorations of that work have all been done, really. So it's kind of, it's just an example. So there's the question about the relevance of the data, and there's also the question about the relevance of the political and policy issue, I think.
More questions, observations? Do you disagree with anything, or do you want to query it rather more deeply? Just don't always accept everything everybody says.
Just wanted to ask, how do you view, or how genuinely you think, from your experience, how is it viewed when someone publishes a view?
You mean if a UK person publishes in an American journal, an Australian journal, or
Yes.
Yeah.
Someone who is based in the UK, is it equal value, or how is this viewed generally?
It really depends on the journal.
Depends on the journal.
Yeah.
And on the field.
Yeah.
I mean, for some economists would rather publish American journals rather not go that's what it feels like. Social policy is a kind of, I say this, it's an international discipline. The roots of it are quite new. We have the core social policy journalists sitting around. Yeah. There are things like journals that are European social policy, comparative journals, advances. There are journals that are allied to things. I mean, if you publish in what we would call public administration, then you actually are more likely to be trying to get American journals, Australian journals like that, rather than social policy. You also have to think about your own careers. Do you want, and who your peers are. The most exciting work in my field is going on with people who are working in America and in Sweden and all over the place. It's not actually happening in the UK. And they're writing for journals that are kind of quite broad, high international kind of journals, and some of them wouldn't actually even recognise what social policy was if it came up and slapped in the face. So it's part of my job to tell them that. But so and you all are lawyers or attorneys, and at some point might want to work outside of the UK. So they'll be looking at your CV and saying, where have you published, who knows you. Getting international citations is not just about trying to push yourself up the league table, it's about getting your voice heard beyond the narrow confines of what's happening within the UK with standards. Sometimes you have to go outside the UK to do that. What I would say is don't publish policy. Nobody in social policy communities will read it. Some of us might pretend to be very good, but publishing which isn't cultural theorism, that's actually fine, but play the game.
About employability in those publications, and what would you recommend if you're applying positions or even funding proposals, and where you've got publications which, it's very how they would be judged for the rep, but pre-rep, how is their quality of their publications like to be judged? For people just look at the journal titles, or they be interested in having titles on titles?
David, I touched on that earlier because I said the rep panel has no pre-given criteria other than the internal quality of the journal article, allegedly. We're all human beings with understandings in their heads of where they think good work is going to be published, and so it's slightly different. I mean, you may be applying for a job in a period where it's the beginning of the rep cycle or something like that, for example. So, I mean, I think those people appointing these days, rightly or wrongly, will be looking at what they think are the potential uses or gradings, if you like, of your publications. And so, yes, despite the fact that we don't rank journals and we don't look at citation indices, we kind of know which are some of the leading journals, and it's undoubtedly likely in an appointments process that people will look at that. Of course, in the UK, the research assessment processes that we've got, the increasing relevance of impact, people will be looking not just at publication, but actually where that leads in terms of the outcome of the publication and the dissemination and impact stream following on from the work. So there'll be lots of those other things that tie in as well.
Yeah, I do think we've made quite a few problems there, including the rep has been paramount. I don't know quite. I mean, we don't know what the next rep will be, so I suspect the rules will carry on, and then there'll be a slight change depending on what it looks like the next rep will be and when it is. And also, because of things like the KISS and the information set and other, I suspect there may be a bit of pressure from the teaching side as well, but I'm not going to guarantee that. But certainly at Lincoln, we just read at least 2 pieces of work for everyone we interview now. So regardless of what they're on.
Sure, yeah. Because we've also done a massive round of working through some of them. We also read. We also look at who you're writing with.
Yeah.
That's actually quite important. If you're an early career researcher, we probably don't know you unless you're in our field. But we will know who you're writing with. If you're writing with somebody good, who we respect, then that you're in, if you're writing with somebody who's in our, department, even better. But there is but seriously, you're not doing this on your own. Seriously, the days where somebody sat in their office on their own in an ivory tower just writing their own work are gone. You have to be, you usually can be working as part of teams. So have you been a good part of that team? What role have you played in that team? I know not so much possibly in our discipline, but in our discipline, are you the first author? Like that. We won't for the rest, but if you look again, if you look at working in the country, they'll be looking at your range of publications. Have you written book chapters? Have you only sat there and written 2 or 3 book chapters and therefore you haven't really woken up to the rest game kind of thing, so we'd be a bit worried about you. The other thing is, have you only written statistical papers with 14 authors on them, in which case where do you stick to voice? How do you know if you're actually a good social policy?
I just say something about the publication cycle.
Yeah.
Because I think what's going on at the moment, it's nearly over, thank God, because the rep is we're nearly up to the point where whatever you do, you can't do it anymore because we're nearly there on this one. There is unquestionably a sort of mounting hysteria to about now, possibly, over the past, let's say, 18 months, possibly 2 years, where people who apply for jobs in that pre-rep period unquestionably will get a rather tougher time, I suspect, getting judged on their outputs than they would have done in 6 months' time if they were applying for the same job or another job in another institution. And that period lasts probably 4 years, as a very rough guess. So the criteria for what a job is in academic work does actually shift depending on where the rep falls, I think. Because, like I've said, God, it might be enough times to my colleagues that, really at the end of the day when you're appointing people, you might be appointing somebody who's going to be there for 10, 15 years for all you know. You want to get the right person. It isn't necessarily the person who's happened to get 3 3-star articles out in time for a rep. So don't be too concerned, particularly now at this juncture, with necessarily having, massive 3-star publications. I mean, I think what will probably happen is that gradually over the next few months, other things will come back to life, which desperately need to, like you don't need teaching, and that kind of thing. And the publications are important. I'm not denying anything that's been said, but they will take their place along other criteria as well. So I think nowadays it's true. It wasn't true, particularly when I was looking for work in 1840 or whatever it was. But you probably have to have publications, almost certainly, 2 or 3 looking there, but it's not the only thing, and it will become just a little bit less important, I think, in the next immediate future.
I think that's absolutely right. I think lots of departments will be breathing a sigh of relief. Now's a chance to actually appoint someone they can put in the task room.
Ruth.
Yeah, hi. I'm just kind of following on from that. I suppose that like in the real world there's always like a trade-off between especially a PhD and applications as well. And I just wonder if you have any thoughts about what the right balance is. So you feel like you're torn in different directions. Sometimes your supervisors are saying, just get your PhD written, and then from an employability perspective, they're also saying that you need to get some kind of applications. It's hard to know, what balance, how to get the right balance.
I'm director of Doctoral Training Centre as well, so I have both hats on. My Doctoral Training Centre hat says, for God's sake, finish your PhD. Get it submitted in on time, take that pressure off yourself. As a supervisor, what I usually try and say to my students is look for one article. Look for the distinctive contribution your paper makes. Try and write it up in 8,000 words, because that will actually help you when you go into the Bible as well, to have a really crystallized idea about what the central thing it is your thesis is trying to say. And the ideal is you've managed to write that at the beginning of your third year. You've got it submitted, you've got referee comments back, so you've got a sense of how the rest of the world sees this. You've got it published, and it's forthcoming. That's fantastic, because you can go into your Bible then, and you can say, and I've tested this. You get the nightmare, the car crash experience of the external examiner has been delayed for 7 hours on the East Coast main line, and they've rocked up, and they've really had it with the universe, and it's your fault. Which never happens, because our professionalism far exceeds that. Then you've got a great defense. You've got a means of saying to them then, and my main claims have already been published in one of the leading journals in the field. It's very difficult in those circumstances for an external examiner to attack you on those points, so long as you're able to defend them in the Bible as well. So I think aiming for one will never do you any harm. I worry about students who try and get into 3 and 4 and 5 publications by the end of their thesis. I wonder if they've been sleeping, frankly. There is a dangerous salami slice at that point as well. You get one really good one. It's better than 2 or 3 really short.
Talk about 10 minutes or so, you need anything to have to have expulsion.
Can I say something which Joe Camping said to me many years ago? Joe Camping would be known to come through all people like here. She used to come to events like this and talk about academic publishing. And the thing she said that always struck me and remained with me was the idea of developing a portfolio. So what you should be thinking of now is you should be sitting down and thinking, okay, what is it I know about? What can I write about? What is the range of audiences that I want to reach? How am I going to go about that? And if you like thinking about this over a medium to long term, because it's very easy to get caught up in this in the short term, all the time thinking, I must write the next piece, I must do this immediately. But also having an idea about who else is it that you want to reach out? Are you trying to get this out to policy communities? There are professional journals out there which are fantastic. The experience of mine writing for the British Medical Journal, it's completely different to writing for a standard peer-reviewed journal article, because you'll get it turned around really quickly. And then all these doctors will start writing to you. And they'll start asking you to leave their profession, and really weird things will happen. And you'll discover you've got your piece cited 20 times in 2 weeks. So there are lots of different publishing experiences you could have. And it's worth thinking about how you want to go about making the arguments you want to make, and how you're going to get yourself known for doing that in the kind of communities you want to circulate. Thinking about that, treating your work seriously enough, not to just be engaged in a continual step of trying to publish the next thing. When is it you'd like to publish the book? What is it you need to do before that? And how can you go about that? What kind of book is it going to be? Would it do any harm to write a textbook at some point? Because you reached a certain point where you think that you can make a contribution to teaching and to pedagogy, or to disseminating this in a wider sense, as well as the monographs. None of these things are necessarily bad. It's working out where it all fits within the goals that you have at that time. I think that's the thing that's really stuck with me, Joseph.
The other thing I would say, just to go back, have this planning and strategy, but also one of the wonderful things about social policy, which is why I keep coming back to social policy, we have the potential in our system to actually have a real impact on people's lives. An awful lot of the work we're doing is addressing real life concerns. It's addressing the outcomes of policies and the impact of policies, and it's helping people develop policies. So when you're thinking about a publication portfolio or publication strategy, don't neglect that side of it. So much research gets written up in academic journals and then just nobody looks at it apart from other academics. It's not lovely and it's really nice to reach them. But our discipline has the potential to make a really significant impact on people's lives. And I think we're going back to having a political engagement actually in what we're doing. If you actually want to have a real impact on people's lives, you actually want to engage with practitioners, you actually want to engage with users, you actually want to engage with communities of interest that are all working, then you need to be thinking about different ways of reaching them, different communication strategies, policy briefings, writing for Care magazine, writing for different kinds of magazines, and not neglect that just because you've got to get your through self-publications and kind of that. I think we as a discipline have a bit of a moral imperative to do that kind of stuff and to value that kind of stuff and those kind of publications.
Question for Ali. So I've been invited to a discussion where there's disagreement about long-term publication strategies and whether people could regurgitate their journal articles for a book. And I just wondered what your views were on the originality of material for publications.
Well, I think the sort of rule of thumb used to be, it's fine to publish some journal articles out of books. It's not either or, and in fact, I would encourage you to do so. I think the rule of thumb used to be no more than a third have been previously published. Again, I would say it depends a little bit on the kind of work you're doing, the audiences you've been trying to reach. Actually, if your book is aimed at a scholarly audience, but actually you've been publishing in professional journals, for example, or some of them, you may get a bit more leeway. I think for me the most important thing is that you just have to think about a book in its entirety. It's got to be that. It can't just be a collection of articles put together. The worst books in the world are those, and the worst edited collections in the world are those where you've just got, I've got a lot of content, I'll stick it between two covers. You've got to think about the arc of the publication, the story it can tell. So some of that can go through journal articles. And often, to be honest, you slightly rewrite them anyway. As in, you don't just take a chapter and send it to a journal or vice versa. It's that, it's making sure that the book does what the book's meant to do in an article.
David and then you, is that okay?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. It's a very good question more generally as well, because we talk about salami slicing. There's the issue of what you might call self-plagiarism as well. And it's an issue which we've confronted a number of times in our journal. And I'll just read you what we say in terms of our submission criteria. We will not normally publish work which contains the same or substantially similar content to work by the same or another author, or is published or being considered for publication elsewhere. It's interesting actually, surprisingly, how frequently we do get things which we say, I read that. And you find that there's a few paragraphs changed, and it's actually been published elsewhere, even in other journals. And I think that's perhaps part of the pressure that people feel under the publication. So, there's the issue about journals versus books, but there's also the issue of kind of republication of material in any format. We're very, very concerned about it, actually. There's a kind of growing tendency at the moment, and we wouldn't do it knowingly. Unfortunately, once or twice we've done it not knowingly. We've published something and found it somewhere else.
There's also a slight ref angle, which is if you've got a book and two articles and they're all the same, then they'll get discounted for their ref. So that'd be really important. We've just not given someone a job in politics because he needed 3 outputs and the 2 journal articles were astonishingly similar to 2 chapters, therefore they wouldn't count for it. So it hasn't actually got 3 unique. So do bear that in mind as well.
on that cheerful note, I think I'm probably going to call it quits now, actually, rather than take another one, because we're in reasonable time. It means we can get to the buses or where we've got to go. So thanks very... Oh, Ben, hello.
Yes, sorry. Can I just make an announcement as well? I'm the early career rep rather than so working alongside the postgrad reps, and we haven't really done very much in the SPA explicitly for early career researchers before. So if you're interested in inputting into what the SPA does on that side of things, we're meeting at 12:50 tomorrow. It's on your insert to let you know the location, but we're back in Halifax, I think. So if you want to come along to that, then grab your lunch at 12:20 quickly, and then move over here after half an hour. And I'm interested in and Nick is obviously interested as well, and I finish that on that.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, and thanks very much for coming. You might want to just clap this lot. They didn't do a bad job. Very much. Thank you.
How are you, Ben? Yeah, good. How are you doing?
Did you get to your school?
Yeah, there was an amazing near Rat organises an annual half-day conference with people because they don't really do any